I was wrong. We shouldn't listen to the NSDA about generalized practical solutions. One, the NSDA rules only apply to two tournaments, basically. Tournaments that are actually officiated by the NSDA, like the district tournaments and the national, or tournaments that choose to take on the NSDA rules, which usually only take them on partially without the part about generalized practical solutions being included. So the vast majority of tournaments that we care about on the national circuit or the local circuit do not use the NSDA rules. Specifically, they do not use the NSDA rules section about generalized practical solutions. Number two, I think that I made an argument last time that the rules are the most important source of predictability compared to the norms. The argument is pretty logical. It goes, the norms are arbitrary. It depends on how many people you know and how long you've done the activity and how long you've like talked to people, how many data points you have to understand the norms, this fluffy concept that's ever evolving. That seems too arbitrary for us. So it's better to have a rooted stasis point of predictability that exists in the rules, that someone who had talked to no one before could come into the activity knowing only the rules and would still understand an idea of what a legitimate strategy is and what an illegitimate strategy would be. I think that's wrong. I think that actually the norms are a greater source of predictability and what counts as legitimate, what you should be expected to count as legitimate or illegitimate compared to the rules. The reasoning is pretty simple. First, reasoning by analogy. Think about the law, for example. If you were arrested for jaywalking, you would be very surprised. It would not be very predictable, and you might be outraged, rightfully so, because there's not an expectation that you are arrested for jaywalking or that that particular law gets enforced, even though it is codified as a rule. The norm of its non-enforcement has been so strong for so long that I think the only just thing for the legal system to do to begin to start enforcing that rule is to tell everyone before that shift occurred in order to make it predictable. Otherwise, the norm certainly overrides the text of the rule, given how prevalent its non-enforcement has been. And that controls fairness and that controls predictability in the legal context. In the debate context, it's the same. I actually think even for first-time novices, it's more likely that they understand public forum debate more because of the conversations that they've had with other people who have either coached or done public forum debate or both, less because they have read the particular rules. I think that there are very few of these fringe cases where someone debates public forum only having read the rules and not having talked to anyone who actually had done the event. Besides, there are so many things in public forum debate that you can only understand that also define the bounds of legitimate versus illegitimate strategies that you can only understand if you've talked with people who've done public forum or if you've watched public forum rounds or if you've done public forum rounds. For example, there's a lot of things about extensions, like you need an extension in the final focus. And this is a legitimate issue. Like so many novices don't understand this when they're first coming in because they haven't talked to enough people. But it is a reality of public forum debate that we all agree on. It's not in the rules. The rules don't say that you have to recreate your argument in the summary and the final focus for it to be counted as legitimate by a technical judge. But we all sort of have come to that agreement because we think that's what's best for debate and that's how debate works and that's what a legitimate strategy is in debate. Similarly, things like theory are allowed in front of lots of judges, but some novices might not understand that. That's also not something that's codified in the rules as being legitimate or illegitimate. Paraphrasing being wrong or something like that. Like that's in the rules, it says that that's actually allowed, but you would still lose on paraphrasing theory in front of a lot of judges. Judge paradigms are malleable. You have to read the judge paradigms. You have to understand what the norm actually is. And this seems also to be constitutive to how the legitimate strategies in public forum debate function and how they evolve over time. It has to be independent from the rules. And even if the rules and the norms contradict each other, I think the norms are higher in terms of their value at contributing to what you should be predictably expected to do. That means generalized practical solutions might be out because they are not a norm. Okay, that's the wrong way to say it. Let me think about how to say it. Because this is silly, right? Like norms can and should change. You can be on the forefront of changing norms. If they should change that way, I mean, go for it, right? Like why not change them? And they don't even need to change in a teleological direct, like you don't need to change them for a specific goal. They don't need to change in the most fair or most educational way. They change. That's just what they do. They do change. They don't have to change in a particular way. They just do. But I think that the strict adherence to the rules does not necessarily control predictability, which means a large part of the argument for why the judges have to abide by this carve out in the rules for generalized practical solutions goes away. I guess my point here is that there are legitimate arguments for questioning generalized practical solutions theoretically in the confines of a debate round and saying and finding that generalized practical solutions are bad. Here are some of those arguments, because I do think the NSDA definition of generalized practical solutions that I clarified in my last video is crazy broad. It's overly broad. For example, the apparent inclusion of something like the 50 states counterplan as a legitimate strategy under generalized practical solution is wild to me. Like, we're already going beyond some of the stuff that people in policy think are legitimate counterplans, because 50 states, like how do you have the legitimate ability to fiat something that is not the actor in the resolution? This is the same logic for a lot of other, like, if you've heard of object fiat, you'll understand some of this. Like, on the arms control topic for policy, for example, one of the arguments was, instead of canceling sales of arms to Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia should just stop accepting them. And then there's some net benefit about how Saudi Arabia doing it is better from the US doing it. But there's a huge question mark around whether or not it's legitimate for you to fiat something from Saudi Arabia's perspective when the actor in the resolution, which is what the AF has to base its plan around, is the US. And so for the fact that that is counted as a generalized practical solution in public forum is like actually ludicrous to me. I think that is not a legitimate argument that you should have access to, and certainly creates a lot of issues for fairness. I think hiding behind the idea that there's a clause in the NSDA rules that says it is a position of advocacy that you may offer, and that somehow means that any theory claims against you are moot, is wrong. And I think that it hurts the good parts about theory debate. The most important thing about debate is that it is a space for academic freedom. It is a place for us to collectively enhance our discourse. And it's a place for us to play a game that is uniquely outside of the confines of rigid rule sets and is always constantly malleable by the players within the game. It's like Dungeons and Dragons. You are a legitimate author of the story by being a player in the game. You are a legitimate co-creator of the form of debate that is public forum by being inside of it and participating within it. That creates a unique kind of agency within this game that we have that creates such creative potential. And to limit that by completely stripping it of any possibility of talking about the rules together within the game that the rules are about, and only confining it to the rules in the NSDA handbook, I think would be a shame. And so I think that there are legitimate grounds to run these kinds of theory arguments against certain types of generalized practical solutions. Now, that said, I think my definition for generalized practical solution is much better, more educational, more fair than the NSDA's definition of generalized practical solutions that it apparently is offering in my email exchange. My definition of generalized practical solutions works more like an advantage counterplan in policy, where it's something that's designed to be permed, as in this is just a solution, right? It's just like, well, we could do this, and it has to be very small in scope. It has to be very easy to do. It has to meet a very minimum threshold for its practicality, and it is very easy to question it, very easy to take it down. It's a weak kind of response that it does not compete, for example, with the AF, and it is something that necessarily is able to exist on both sides. The net benefit just becomes the advantages or the disadds, the pros and the cons, and that's how it tests the intrinsicness of the arguments to the resolution. I think that's a totally legitimate generalized practical solution. I think that's good for debate. I think that that especially is good for debate because there are a lot of arguments that intuitively are totally wrong, but sometimes the most clear way that they are totally wrong is because there's a generalized practical solution. I gave examples in my generalized practical solutions video about like if you take a trip to Vietnam, the we're gonna crash on our moped DA is obviously wrong if you just say don't ride a moped. Like that's such that is the most obvious answer. Even if there are other answers like, oh no, just wear a helmet. I mean, that's also a generalized practical solution. All of the obvious answers there are generalized practical solutions. I think they are legitimate because this is how a debate logically should function. And they are fair because they only serve to limit the most intuitively illogical types of arguments that should be weakened as a result of them. I think one useful concept for this might be this idea of fiat. Specifically, I want to introduce this idea of like minimal fiat. 0.1 fiat is what I call it, where the only fiat that you're using for your generalized practical solution is like seeding the idea in the actor's mind and overcoming the inertia of like laziness. If they make any arguments for why the actor has strong reasons not to do the generalized practical solution, that no longer makes it practical. That's not something that they realistically would do. I think that this does overcome arguments that are like, oh, you have no evidence or no reasons why they would do this because that 0.1 fiat gets you over that hump, but it fails against arguments that are like, there are enormous resource constraints on doing this no longer practical, or there's enormous like political backlash that would be inspired by doing this no longer practical. I think this interpretation is what I would run in a debate round. It says debaters should be allowed this, and I would only run this after they say you're not allowed this. But I guess this would be a counter interpretation, right? They would have to have an interpretation that says debaters are not allowed to offer these kinds of solutions. My counter interpretation would be I am allowed with 0.1 fiat. And this would be how I would define it. I think this kind of generalized practical solution is educational, is fair, is defensible, but still should be questioned on theoretical basis. I don't think the answer should just be it's in the NSDA rules. But I also don't think that your answer against the generalized practical solution should just be that the rules don't allow it. That's not an answer. You should have the theory debate. You should have actual reasons why this is not something that's fair or not something that's educational. And like rather than just hand waving it and saying, obviously this is not fair, obviously this is not in the rules. Like, no, I don't think that's obvious, especially in the cases that I'm talking about. That debate should actually happen in the round. But I was totally wrong about everything before, about just like hand waving all of this theory debate and saying the NSDA rules control all of it. NSDA rules control predictability. That's bogus. That's totally wrong. The norms control predictability, even if the norms evolve over time, even if we're all in a constant process of contributing to those norms, they still by far contribute more to predictability and more to legitimate strategies and fairness than the rules ever could. So let's not be bound by the rules, but let's still allow ourselves the creative potential to take this idea of generalized practical solutions from the NSDA rules. We don't even need the words anymore. We could call it whatever we want now. We're not bound by the wording of the NSDA rules anymore. We can get rid of that and just use this as a useful tool that is not a plan or a counter plan, but is something that we can invent on our own in public forum to move public forum as a debate style forward by offering this kind of strategy as a legitimate strategy using counter interpretations that can defend it on theoretical grounds and make better defensive arguments against clearly unintuitive arguments. That's my position.